Hey, my name is Daniel. I'm 30 years old, and I live in a small house I am renting to own on the east side of Calder, Montana, a town of about 4,000 people that sits at the foot of a long valley between two mountain ranges, where the winters are serious and the summers are brief and beautiful, and everyone who lives here has made a specific peace with both. The house has 3 rooms and a covered porch, and a yard with 2 cottonwood trees that drop their seeds every June in a way that looks like snow and feels like something you should take a photograph of, even though you've seen it every year for 4 years and the novelty should have worn off. It hasn't. I work in water management. Not the kind with an office, the kind with waiters. I'm a stream restoration technician for the County Conservation District, which means my job is to go to places where human activity has damaged waterways and figure out how to put them back. Eroded banks, sedimented channels, invasive plants choking out native riparian growth, livestock that have been allowed to graze too close to the water's edge until the bank undercuts and the stream starts eating itself. I carry equipment I can explain, and equipment I mostly cannot explain without a whiteboard. And I know the difference between a stream that is tired and a stream that is dying. And I know that the difference matters more than most people who live upstream from a tired stream will ever understand. The work is physical and seasonal, and I am outside almost every day from March through October, and mostly at a desk from November through February, catching up on documentation that I have been avoiding since March. I like the outdoor months and tolerate the indoor ones, and I have learned, over 6 years of doing this, that the streams I work on are almost always worse than anyone admits before I see them, and almost always more recoverable than anyone believes after I see them. My days in the field follow a loose pattern that the conditions revise every morning. I am at the office by 7:30, check the day's site assignments and weather, load the truck and drive out. Most of what I do is slow and observational, walking reaches of water and reading them, which is not a metaphor, it is the actual job. You read the banks for erosion signatures, the substrate for compaction and sedimentation, the vegetation for species composition, and whether the natives are holding or the invasives have moved in. You read the water itself, which has moods in the way that most people would not expect, and that most hydrologists would not describe that way, but that is still, informally, accurate. A healthy stream feels different underfoot from a sick one. You develop, over years, a sense of what is working and what is not that precedes the data and is then confirmed by the data. And you learn to trust the sense without ignoring the confirmation. That is the part nobody tells you about restoration work. The damage looks total until you learn how to read it, and then you start to see the places where the system is still trying. I am a person who notices where systems are still trying. I have not always applied that skill evenly. I was with Vanessa for 2.5 years. I want to be careful about how I say this, because she is a real person with her own version of the story, and her version is probably different from mine in the ways that matter. And that is her right. My version is that for 2.5 years I was with someone who was very good at being the center of a room and needed me to confirm regularly that she was the center of mine. That is not a flaw, it is a particular kind of person, and those people are not wrong for being who they are. She was smart and driven and socially adept in ways I had always found slightly beyond me, and for the first year of the relationship I had found it bracing. The feeling of being pulled into warmer, brighter rooms than I usually occupied. The problem came later, when I understood that what the warmer rooms required of me was a sustained performance of attention and enthusiasm that I did not naturally have, and that the gap between what I was giving and what was needed was a thing she noticed and named often, and that the naming, over time, started to feel like something I could not fix. No matter what I did, I kept trying to find the balance. I kept thinking, a little more patience, a little more effort, and I will figure out how to do both at once. I never figured it out. What I did instead was spend 2.5 years mostly tired, and I did it the way I knew how to do it, quietly, without complaint, telling myself it was fine. The way you tell yourself a bank is fine when you can see it's been eroding at the toe, but you're not ready to call it yet. The end came on a Friday evening in late April, in the kitchen of the apartment she had been renting since we'd talked, a year in, about whether we should move in together, and decided. She decided, and I agreed in the way I agreed to most things in that relationship, which was less deciding and more not objecting, that it was too soon. I had driven 40 minutes from a site visit, still in my work clothes, for a dinner I had told her I would be at by 7 and was now at by 7:40, because the site had needed more of me than the timeline had accounted for. She had been in the kitchen when I arrived. She had been holding a serving spoon, and she had looked at me with the expression she had for arriving late, which was a specific expression, and she had said, without preamble, "I've been thinking about this for a while." We talked for 2 hours. At the end of those 2 hours, during which several true things were said on both sides, and several things were said that were less true but felt necessary in the moment, she said, in the particular tone of a person who believes they are delivering an unanswerable final statement, "You will never find anyone like me." It was not meant as a threat. I understood that. It was meant as a truth, as she saw it. She was extraordinary in several specific ways, and she knew it. And knowing it was part of who she was, and saying it at the end of a conversation where she felt she was losing I understood it. I did. But something happened in me when she said it. Something that had been building for 2.5 years, maybe longer. A quiet pressure under a surface that had been smoothed too long, and it found the line and it came out before I had decided to say it. "I already have," I said. The kitchen was very quiet after that. I heard the refrigerator. I heard the clock above the stove. I heard, from somewhere in myself, the specific quality of silence that follows something you cannot unsay and aren't sure you want to. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Who?" And I had no answer for her, because the name that had come to the surface when I said it, the name that had produced the words before I'd consciously reached for them, belonged to a woman who lived 20 minutes from me in Calder and worked at the county library and had brown hair and a dry sense of humor, and had, over the course of the previous 8 months, become the person I talked to when the days were long and I needed something that felt real. And she did not know any of that. And neither, until that moment in Vanessa's kitchen, had I. Her name was Ruth. I had met Ruth Calloway the previous August, on a Tuesday afternoon, when I had been sent to assess the drainage situation behind the library. The county building, which was also Ruth's building, had a stormwater issue that was causing erosion along the back of the property, and the Conservation District had been asked to take a look. I had knocked on the back door because the main entrance required walking around the building, and I was in waders and carrying a probe rod, and it seemed like the less disruptive entrance. Ruth had opened the door. She had looked at me the way you look at someone who shows up at your back door in waders with a probe rod, which is a specific look, 1 part confusion and 2 parts resolving the confusion into something manageable. Then she had looked at the erosion along the back of the property, which was visible from the doorway, and she had looked back at me and said, "You're here about the bank?" "Yeah," I said. "It's been getting worse since last fall," she said. "I've been reporting it. They kept saying they were going to send someone. They sent me," I said. "Well," she said. "Good, come in. Do you want coffee?" I did not usually accept coffee from people at work sites. I had a thermos and a timeline and the probe rod. I said yes, because it was cold for August, and she was already turning back into the library, and it would have required a decision to say no. I spent an hour on the erosion assessment and 40 minutes on the coffee. The library had a back room with a worktable that she used for processing new acquisitions, and we sat across from it, and she asked me what I was actually going to do about the bank, and I told her, in more detail than most people wanted, about bioengineering approaches to bank stabilization, willow stakes, brush mattresses, toe protection, the logic of letting the root systems do the long-term work. She listened with the particular quality of attention I had learned to recognize as genuine interest, rather than politeness. She asked 3 questions, each of which was better than the last. "You know a lot about this," she said at the 3rd question. "It's what I do," I said. "No," she said. "Lots of people do jobs without knowing a lot about them. You know a lot about this." She looked at me. "How long have you been doing it?" I told her 6 years. She told me she had been at the library for 4, which told me approximately her age, and that she had grown up in Havre, which told me she was a Montana person and understood the specific texture of living in a place where the winters were serious and people had to mean it. She had the quality I most valued in people I met through work. She said what she was actually thinking and did not apologize for it. She asked me how long the stabilization work would take, and I told her the bank installation could be done in a day, but the roots would need 2 to 3 seasons to fully establish, and she would need to manage foot traffic near the bank edge during that time. She said, "How do you explain that to people? That the fixing happens slowly?" I said, "You tell them the ground is still working. Most people can accept that if you frame it right." She had looked at me and then looked out at the back of the property where the eroded bank was visible and said, "I've been trying to explain that to the county board about the building's heating system for 2 years. I'll try your phrasing." She had not smiled when she said it. She had just said it and then turned back to the worktable. And I had understood something about her in that moment that I would keep adding to over the following months. She was precise in her humor and never performed it. I went back 3 times over the following 2 months to check the bank stabilization work. I did not need to go back 3 times. The crew I'd contracted did good work, and I trusted them, and the monitoring could have been done remotely. I went back because Ruth had started leaving the back door unlocked on the days I had told her I was coming, and there would be coffee in the back room, and she would sit across from the worktable, and we would talk about the stream bank, and then about other things, and then about whatever we happened to be thinking about, which got wider and more specific the more often we did it. She told me things about the library that I had not known to wonder about, the internal economy of a small county library, the specific calculus of collection decisions, what to buy when your budget is limited and your patrons span 60 years of reading habits and nobody agrees on what the shelves should hold. She told me about a patron who came in every Thursday at 10 and read the same novel over several weeks, slowly, never checking it out, just sitting in the chair by the window and reading for an hour and leaving a bookmark. She told me about a program she was trying to start, a seed library, where people could check out seeds the way they checked out books, return saved seeds at the end of the season, build a collection that belonged to the whole county. She said she had been trying to get funding for it for 2 years and had been told no 3 times and was going to try again in the spring with a revised proposal. She said it without self-pity and without bitterness, just as a fact about persistence. The way she said most things. I told her things I did not usually tell people at work sites. I told her about a tributary I'd worked on the summer before that had been so damaged by decades of agricultural runoff that nobody at the district had believed it was recoverable, and how I'd spent a week walking it and reading it, and finally found a reach about 2 miles upstream where the native vegetation was still holding on, still doing the work, still knitting the bank together despite everything that had come down from above it. I had built the restoration plan backward from that reach. If it's still trying here, the whole system can recover. You just have to stop what's been doing the damage and give the trying room to spread. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which almost nobody did. And at the end she said, "Do you think people work that way too? You just have to find the reach that's still holding on?" I thought about that for a long time after I left. I was, during all of this, with Vanessa. I want to be clear about that. I was not unfaithful, not in any way that anyone else would observe. Ruth knew I was with someone, because I had mentioned Vanessa as a fact early, the way you mention context when you are trying to be straight with a person you are coming to trust. Ruth had not mentioned it after that. Neither had I. We were, strictly speaking, people who talked at a workplace during a professional visit, plus the coffee. That was all it was, and we both knew that. What I did not say to Ruth or to myself was what I was actually doing on those drives back to the site. I did not say, "I notice when I have left there, and I do not notice when I leave most places." I did not say, "She makes me feel like what I think is worth saying," which is not a thing I have felt often enough to be accustomed to. I did not say any of it. I kept it on the other side of a line that I had not drawn but was aware of, the way you are aware of a bank that hasn't broken yet. After the fourth visit, the work was done, and I had no more reason to go back. I kept going. Not every week, I wasn't reckless with it, but often enough that Ruth started putting a second mug out before I knocked on the back door. She had finished a book she had mentioned in October and started another. I had finished a documentation project and started a drainage report that was going badly. We talked about both. In December, she said, "Is everything okay?" At home. I did not ask how she knew to ask. I said, "More or less." She looked at me. She had a way of looking at things she wasn't sure about that was very still and very direct, like she was checking a map before she said where she thought we were. "Okay," she said. "You don't have to say." "I know," I said. "But if it would help to say something, it's complicated," I said. "Most things are," she said. "That doesn't mean you can't look at them." I didn't say anything else that afternoon. I drove home and I thought about what she'd said. That doesn't mean you can't look at them. And I thought about the streams I worked on, about how the damage always looked total until you learned how to read it, about how you had to actually look at the thing before you could know what was still trying. I was not ready to look at it. Not yet. The months between December and April were long in the way indoor months in Calder are long. The light goes early and the cold is absolute, and you spend a lot of time at a desk doing work you have been avoiding and looking out windows at the mountains. I saw Ruth less. Not deliberately, or not entirely deliberately. The sites were dormant, and the legitimate excuses were gone, and going to the back door of a library in January with no probe rod and no professional reason felt like something I did not yet know how to be honest about. I thought about her often. I want to be accurate about that, not romantically, not with any clear agenda, but with the specific quality of thinking about someone whose company you miss in a way you have not found language for yet. I would be at my desk reading a drainage report, and something in it would produce a thought I wanted to say out loud to a specific person, and that person was Ruth, and I would note that and go back to the report. In February, the seed library proposal was approved. She sent me an email. I had given her my work address for the documentation on the bank stabilization. A single line, "The seed library is funded." "Thought you'd want to know." I wrote back, "That's excellent." "Congratulations." She did not reply, and I did not expect her to. But I thought about the 3 times she had been told no, and the revised proposal, and the fact that she had not quit. And I thought, that is exactly the quality. That is the reach that is still holding on. March was better, and April was the month everything happened at once. The sites opening up, the documentation closing out, Vanessa's kitchen, the serving spoon, the words that came out before I had decided to say them. After I left Vanessa's apartment that night, I drove home. I did not go to Ruth. It would have been wrong, in the specific technical sense that what I'd said in that kitchen was not something I had yet earned the right to act on. I had said something true under pressure, and I did not yet know what to do with it. I sat on my porch and looked at the mountains in the April dark and thought about what she would say when I told her. Not what Ruth would say. I didn't know that yet, and I wasn't going to invent it. I thought about what the conversation would be. I thought about the fact that for 8 months I had been coming to the back door of a library with no stated reason except the coffee and the company, and I had never said the thing I was thinking, and she had never said it either, and I did not know what to make of the fact that neither of us had. I also thought about this, that I had been doing the same thing with the relationship I had been doing with the streams in my winter documentation reports. Noting the problem, filing it in the right column, not yet calling it what it was because calling it meant deciding what to do about it, and deciding what to do about it meant disruption, and disruption meant things not being smooth, and I had spent 6 years learning to keep systems smooth. What I had forgotten, somewhere along the way, was that the goal was never smoothness. The goal was the water moving in the direction it wanted to move. Smoothness was just how it looked when you were doing it right. I thought about what she'd said in December. That doesn't mean you can't look at them. I looked at the mountains for a long time. Then I went inside and made tea and went to bed, and on Saturday I took a long walk along the river south of town. And on Sunday I fixed a section of fence in my backyard that had been bothering me for 3 months. And on Monday morning I drove to the library. I went to the library on a Monday. Not to the back, to the front door. Because I was not in waiters, and I did not have a probe rod, and there was no bank stabilization work left to pretend about. She was at the front desk. She looked up when I came in. She did not look surprised. Exactly, she looked like someone who had been waiting to see how something was going to go, and was now watching it go. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. There was a patron at the desk, finishing a transaction. Ruth handled it, stamped the books, said goodbye, smiled the way she smiled at everyone, which was a specific and considered smile, not the same one for every person. The patron left. The library was quiet the way libraries are quiet, not silent, but hushed by agreement, like a room full of people who have all made the same decision about what matters. "Vanessa and I ended it," I said. She looked at me. "When?" "Friday. Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said. I think it had been ending for a long time. Friday was just when it actually did. She nodded slowly. She put a book on the returns cart, and she was quiet for a moment, the still and direct look, the map checking. Then she said, "Why are you here, Daniel?" It was the right question. It was the question I deserved for 8 months, of back doors and unspoken things, and the careful maintenance of a line I had never drawn, but had been very aware of. "Because I said something on Friday," I said, "something I didn't plan to say. And then I went home and sat on my porch and thought about it for 2 days, and I think it was true. And I owe you the chance to know what I said." She was very still. "Okay," she said. A patron came to the desk. Ruth helped her. A hold that had come in. A card that needed renewing, with the efficient warmth of someone who has been doing a job long enough that it requires no visible effort. The patron thanked her and left. Ruth looked back at me. "Go ahead," she said. I told her about the kitchen. I told her what Vanessa had said and what had come out of me before I decided on it. I did not make it dramatic, and I did not perform it. I just said. She told me I'd never find anyone like her, and something in me said I already had, and what came to the surface when I said it was you. Ruth looked at me for a long time. The library clock ticked. Outside, a car passed on the street. Behind the stacks, somewhere, someone was pulling books off a shelf, the small rhythmic sound of spines being handled. "I want to make sure I understand what you're saying," she said. Not cold, careful, the way she was careful about things that mattered. "I'm saying I've been coming to the back door of this building for 8 months, I said. Not for the bank, for the coffee and the company and the way it feels to talk to you, which is the way I imagine it should feel to talk to someone, and mostly hasn't." I looked at the returns cart. I'm saying that when she told me I'd never find anyone like her, I heard myself say something that told me I'd already been thinking about you in a way I hadn't admitted. I looked back at her. "I'm not asking you to do anything with that today. I just owe you the honesty of saying it." Ruth looked at me for a long time. The library clock ticked. 8 months, she said. "Yeah, you've been coming to that back door for 8 months. "Yes," I said. "And you didn't say anything." "No," I said. She looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between fond and exasperated, and something else that I did not yet have a name for, but that I wanted to have a name for. "Daniel," she said. "I know," I said. "I put out a second mug before you knocked," she said. "Every time. For 6 months. I know," I said. "I noticed. And you didn't say anything." "I didn't think it was mine to say," I said. "I was with someone. And even when that was, even when I knew it wasn't right, I didn't think I could say it and mean it the right way. Not from inside that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And now?" "Now I'm not inside it," I said. "And I'm here, through the front door, in my regular clothes, with no professional reason to be in this building." She looked at me. Something shifted in her face. The still and direct gave way to something warmer and less defended. "That might be the least romantic way anyone has ever told me something like this," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm better at streams than at this." "I know," she said. "I've been watching you explain streams for 8 months." She looked at the returns cart. "You know what I kept thinking all those times? When you came to the back door?" "What?" "That you saw things clearly," she said. "In the field. You'd look at a bank, and you could read it, where it was tired, where it was still trying, what it needed, and in what order. You were very calm about it, very precise." She looked at me. "And then you'd look at everything else like you were hoping someone else would read it for you." I thought about the streams I worked on, about how the damage always looks total until you learn to read it, about 2.5 years of hoping the tiredness would sort itself without anyone having to look directly at it. "I'm looking now," I said. "Yeah," she said. "I see that." She was quiet for a moment. 2 patrons came in through the front door, nodded at the desk, headed toward the stacks. Ruth watched them go. She put another book on the cart. Then she said, without looking at me, "There's a coffee place on 2nd Street that opened in January. I've been meaning to go. I haven't found anyone to go with. I don't have anywhere to be until 2, I said. She looked at me. The warm look, the less defended one. "It's 10:30, she said. "I know," I said. She took her coat from the hook behind the desk and called to someone in the back room that she was stepping out. Then she came around the desk and stood next to me, and we walked out through the front door together into the May morning, which was the first genuinely warm morning of the year, the kind that arrives in Montana like a kept promise, the air carrying the smell of the mountains thawing and the valley waking up, and the river, somewhere beyond the buildings, running clear and fast with snowmelt. She put her hands in her coat pockets, and she looked up at the sky for a moment, the specific look of someone who has been inside too long and is recalibrating. And I thought about a Tuesday in August when she had opened a back door and looked at me with one part confusion and two parts resolving it into something manageable. She had been resolving me into something manageable for 8 months. I had not been fair to either of us. There is a woman I work with at the district named Patricia, who has been doing riparian restoration since before I was born, and who says very little in the field except when what she has to say is worth saying. In early June, she drove with me to a site southeast of town, a tributary that had been on the list for 2 years and was finally getting attention, and we walked the reach in the morning light, she with her clipboard and I with mine. And she stopped at one point and looked at a section of bank that had been rebuilt the previous fall and said, "That held." Just that. 2 words. But the way she said it had the quality of something settled. That held meaning. The work was right. The roots took. The thing you were trying to do is doing it. She said something else in June. I was behind on a report and distracted in the specific way that people distracted by something good are distracted, and she looked at me from across the truck and said, "What are you smiling at?" I told her I was not aware I had been smiling. She gave me the look she gives when she has been doing this work since before I was born, and knows exactly what she is looking at. "The work'll keep," she said. "Go home on time tonight." I went home on time. Ruth had dinner on my porch that June evening. She had brought a book. She always brought a book, not to read necessarily, more the way other people bring a jacket, in case they need it, and she set it on the rail without opening it, and we sat with the cottonwood seeds coming down in the long evening light, which she had not seen before, and which I had been watching every June for 4 years. She tilted her head back and looked at the seeds falling against the sky. "That's extraordinary," she said. "Every year," I said. "Every year you sit here and watch this? Every year? Alone?" I looked at her. "Not this year," I said. She looked back at the seeds. She had a slight smile, not performed, just there. She reached over and put her hand over mine on the arm of the chair, and she did not say anything, and neither did I, because the cottonwood seeds were still falling, and the sky was still doing what Montana skies do in June evenings, which is something you have to actually be there to understand, and there was nothing to add. The stream behind the library has been stable for 3 years now. The willow stakes took hold in the first season. The root systems are doing what root systems do, holding the bank, knitting themselves into the substrate, providing exactly the kind of quiet, invisible, persistent support that keeps a thing in place over time. I go by occasionally to check it. I always go through the front door now. Ruth and I got married the following May at the county fairgrounds under a tent, in the rain, which in Montana in May is not a surprise, but is still somehow exactly right. Patricia came and stood in the back with the expression she brought to sites where the work had been done correctly. Quiet, unsurprised, satisfied. My mother cried, which she had told me specifically she was not going to do, and I did not mention it. Ruth's parents drove from Havre, and her father, a man of approximately 12 words total, shook my hand after the ceremony and said, "She's been patient for you." I said I knew. He said, "Don't waste it." I said I wouldn't. The seed library had its second season that spring. Ruth had expanded it, more seed varieties, a small reference section on saving and storage, a partnership with the county extension office that she had spent the winter negotiating with the particular patient persistence of someone who has been told no 3 times and learned that no is not a terminus. She came home from the library on the day the partnership was finalized and set her bag down and said, "It worked," in the tone of someone who had always believed it would and had not let herself say so until it did. The cottonwood trees were already dropping their seeds that May. She had seen it once before, the previous June on the porch, and she had said it was extraordinary. This time, she stood on the porch and watched, and did not say anything. And neither did I, because we had stood here before and we knew what it was, and sometimes that is the whole point, that you have stood in the same place long enough to know what it means. There is a thing I have learned over 6 years of working on streams that have been damaged by years of slow erosion. The system is almost always still trying. Under the sedimentation, under the undercut banks, under the invasive growth that has taken over where the natives couldn't hold on, there is still a channel. There is still water moving in the direction it wants to move. You don't have to rebuild it from nothing. You just have to stop the damage that's been piling on and give the system room to do what it has been trying to do all along. I said something in a kitchen in April that came out of me before I had decided on it. But it had been true for longer than that. It had been true since August. Since a back door and a probe rod and a cup of coffee and a woman who asked 3 questions, each better than the last, and listened like she actually wanted to know what the answers were. I had been standing in front of it for 8 months. I just hadn't looked at it directly. Maybe the hardest thing is not finding the right person. Maybe the right person has been there long enough that the back door is already unlocked and the second mug is already out, and the hardest thing is just having the honesty to walk through the front door instead.